Good morning, everybody. I'm so thrilled to have all of you here. We're jam-packed. We're oversold in this session, and I can see why with the incredible panel we have. In all of your paperwork, you can see the more detailed bios of the esteemed panel that we have, so I'm not going to go into all of that because it gets like a little tedious, and we just want to get right to it, but I will quickly say that we are thrilled that you're here for the 16th Annual Milken Conference, and you happen to be in what I believe will be one of the panels where you actually come up with ideas and participate in helping us come up with ideas on how we can get women past that weird region of middle management all the way up to the top. And so be thinking, because we will open this closer to the end for your ideas and questions, and maybe be thinking what's worked where you work or what hasn't worked. We'd love to hear all of that. I'm Liz Claman. I'm an anchor and correspondent at the Fox Business Network, and oh boy, when I got asked to do this panel, I thought this is perfect because the title is Leaning In or Pushed Out, Where Are the Senior Women in Business? And leaning in, of course, is coming from the Sheryl Sandberg book that's out, which in essence kind of puts the onus on us, women, for the reason that we're not reaching the top. It's been very controversial. Some people are super supportive. Some think that it's blaming the victim. But the fact is, doesn't matter. We're not going to do blaming here. We're not going to do kvetching. We're not going to do whining. We're not going to do finger pointing. We're going to do ideas, solutions, and realities of what we have seen out there. So, quickly to introduce the panel, Lauren Leichtman is to my left, my far left there. Lauren, of course, is a superstar. She's with Levine Leichtman Capital, private equity, partner, CEO, principal. She also worked for the SEC. She also went to Columbia Law. I hate her, okay? I mean, could you be any more amazing, Lauren? Sallie Krawcheck to my left. You may be familiar with her because she's also been a superstar in the business world. She is formerly the president of Bank of America Global Wealth and Investment Management, was chairman and CEO of Sanford C. Bernstein, just a brilliant force when it came to research back in the time when research was under all kinds of fire. Sallie's a mom of two. She is one of my personal heroes in that regard, working and making it all the way there and being very realistic about life. Richard Ditizio is next to me here. He's with the Milken Institute. He's executive director of business and program development. 25-year banking career, so I'm sure you had many opportunities to promote women. We'll get the dirt if you really did. And finally, we have Margery Kraus right here. Margery, we're thrilled to have as well. She is APCO Worldwide, a global communications firm founder, started with one DC office and now basically has her footprint, every single nation in the world except Antarctica. So don't get in her way. Okay. So let's get to this and start with the reality. Women account for more than half of all college graduates, yet at some point, once they make it to a really big portion of Wall Street or whatever business you're in, they get to that middle management area. Somehow along the way, they either get lost getting to the top or are barred from getting to the top. So right off the bat, I want to identify what the collective experience has been here and to find out what the hell is going on here and why is that happening? Lauren, I'd like your experience first.
I think it's a combination of being barred and also not pushing through it. And I think that there is kind of an old boy network, certainly on Wall Street. I experienced it early in my career when I was at the law firm here in Southern California. I don't know that that still exists in law firms, but certainly it did when I was one of the only women there, and there were lots of sexist jokes, and at that time we didn't think about suing people, we just worked through it. But I also think that you can have as many programs trying to empower women as possible, but the people in power are not just going to turn it over because we think it's a societal good to have, a mixed bag of senior management. Women have to push for that. They have to push people out of the way and not take no for an answer.
And to a huge extent, Margery, we have to prove ourselves. I think it hurts all of us if it's a complaining, how come there are no women? Okay, fine, you take it, and then you blow it, I mean, how important is that once we get up there and through your experiences?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, apropos kind of pushing through, we've had a lot of experiences around the world where if you give a man and a woman the same opportunity, the man's response is always, sure, I'll do it. And the woman is always more honest, saying, you know, I never did that before. And you get this sense of hesitation. And so sometimes we're a little bit that we have an aura sometimes that maybe we are not as qualified. So it isn't so much, I think, that women blow it. I think that women blow the opportunities through the way in which they communicate or don't communicate about their own ambition, that somehow there's a cultural barrier to expressing your own ambition and having a true conversation about things like that. And so that's part of it. I think the other thing is, and before we beat ourselves up too much, in addition to running my own company, I chair a group called WPO, Women Presidents Organization, and that's 1,400 women-owned businesses. And in the last 10 years or so, women-owned businesses, women who have become entrepreneurs, have grown about 57% faster than a lot of the male or other entrepreneurs. And, you know, sometimes being pushed out or being, it's taking a different track that where women can be more in control of their own destiny. So it's not just, I think we have to look at this in kind of a two-track situation.
Sallie, you've been both in that position of being told you're going to be the CEO. I'm sure there was at one point you had never been a CEO, so you had to look at your own abilities and respond to that great job offer. And then later on, you gave job offers to women who you saw that sort of haze over their eyes like, can I really do this? I mean, talk about that.
Yeah. So let me start off with, you know, if the answers were easy, we would have the answer. And, you know, I'm a research analyst by training, as Liz said, and so I tend to, you know, embrace everyone's opinions, but I really want the facts. And the facts are that companies with diverse management teams and all kinds of diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of color, diversity of gender, outperform management teams that are more alike. And not by little bits. Catalyst has shown ROEs more than 30% higher, volatility lower, client focus greater, long-term perspective greater. There is actually nothing bad that happens from having more women in senior positions. Nothing that I have seen. And yet, I guess part of the challenge is, you know, how do you know that road not taken? If we put a woman in that role, would our ROE be better or would it be worse? It's hard to know what all the variables are. And so I tend to hope that, you know, the boards will begin to understand the research and place some very good, helpful pressure on management teams to increase this, not for a fairness issue, but for a results issue. Now, what's happened, as we know, over the past 15 or so years is we've flatlined on this, and in the industry that I come from, and one where I think we could all agree could use lower volatility, lower risk, more client focus, which is the large financial institutions, we've actually gone backwards on these metrics. And yet we don't really get much debate about it. And quite frankly, when we do, we tend to be mostly women who are talking about it. So I think we've convinced ourselves, right? I think we all get it here. You know, our challenge is how do we get that out, get that to the boards, and or also begin to choose a different path too. You know, we can get to the tops of companies, but I think we also need to be looking at starting our own businesses, right, et cetera, so that we can have a couple of different paths through which women can more effectively engage economically and grow the economy. Which
is what Lauren and Margery actually did, going on their own way. Richard, you were in that structure, that gigantic corporate structure for many years at Citigroup. In fact, Sallie was there when you were there at certain points.
I was actually his boss.
Yes.
Putting that out there.
And what was that like, Richard?
To work for Sallie. Well, I mean, I think I have a general comment. So inside large organizations, the first thing I would say is addressing gender is not philanthropy. This is not the United Way. Right? There's a business rationale for creating a level playing field, and I think by lumping these diversity initiatives into HR, there tends to have some sort of charitable component to it, like it's a nice thing to do for the little ladies that work here.
What he means, let me just clarify, is most of the top, if you really get up there, the heads of divisions, it's HR, right?
In other words, I think that these initiatives, these women's initiatives inside large-scale corporations tend to be housed under an HR diversity banner. And by doing so, instead of putting it right in the trenches of the business line, I think it has a very different flavor to it. So what we really need to do is women need to stop being so grateful. I think I'm going to throw it out there. You need to kind of demand things as the largest percentage of the workforce, certainly in the business from which Sallie and I come from. Far more than 50% of the top producing bankers are female as opposed to male, largely because of the traits that she mentioned. The risk measurement, the ability to deal with clients is much more engendered inside women who are more effective. And yet, they don't ever take control or ascend to the positions that they deserve because they're waiting for someone to hand it to them and push them.
One of the lines that I came up with when I was early on in my career was that if I really wanted, in breaking into television news, you were constantly having to sell yourself. I'm the one, I'm the one who's going to come in at 2 a.m. on a sub-zero February night to stand outside the crack house and wait for the suspect, charming. But every time that I got the shot, I practiced in the mirror and I looked at whoever was going to say, yes, you've got the job, and I practiced saying, you'll never regret this. Okay, even though I was quaking inside many times, I didn't know what the job was. I hadn't done it before. What, Sallie, when you were hiring, you had the opportunity to hire people, didn't it frustrate you? And let's be honest about this. You said women are so super grateful. When you gave them the chance, I want to promote you, you see that cloud of doubt. Can I really do this? People don't want to see that. They want to see what the guys do. Awesome, dude, I'm your guy. That's fantastic. Don't worry. Men are a lot less intellectually honest about their abilities than women are. And that works very well for them. So do women hurt themselves by being intellectually honest? Oh, but I've never done that before.
Well, yes, and look, we should all send a big, disappointed, heavy sigh to Walt Disney, right? Because we all grew up on Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and do what you're supposed to do and keep your head down, and then good things will happen to you. And that's not really how it works in business. In fact, the unwritten rules of business, women say, gosh, no one told me, but the research indicates it's having networks, it's, pointing the boss toward the metrics. But here's the problem. We have this, as Catalyst calls it, a double-bind dilemma, which is if we're too forward, we're viewed as aggressive, and we make men uncomfortable. And if we are too shy, and too self-effacing, then we don't get the responsibilities, which is why I think we need to go back to the boards and the CEOs who need to look at this research and say, this makes business sense. And by the way, CEO, right, this is how women may react. We can try to, strip their estrogen of them, and put some more testosterone in, but let's be careful of cascading bias. Let's be careful of that because the CEO is a guy, that we then measure everyone by him, right, and by his senior management team. But the boards, the smart boards, are going to start to look at not what we all fall back on. And this is the one that we always fall back on. I just want to put the best person in the job. Yeah. I just want to put the best person in the job. Happens to be a guy who looks a lot like me, right? In fact, it's funny because you see some of these management teams, you're like, are y'all cousins? Looks a lot like me, a very handsome man. But that we want to put the best team in place. Now, this may be a subtle difference. Do we have any basketball fans here? Any UNC basketball fans? Okay. We can argue that the best basketball players, some of the best basketball players to ever play for UNC are Ty Lawson, Jimmy Black, Kendall Marshall, Phil Ford, Raymond Felton. And they're right up there. For those of you who follow the sport, they're all point guards. So they may be the best individuals, but will they make the best team? They will never win a national championship. You need to have people with different skills. And so when I looked to put together my management team, I looked for diversity of gender, diversity of complexion, but also diversity of style. So we'd always have one person in there who was our visionary, right? And you had one operational person. And if boards can start to think about getting returns for the shareholders by having the right team in place, I think that's the lever. I think telling women, telling bosses, do this and do this, that'll get us from 15, 16% of women in senior roles to some single-digit percent higher, I think. It's not going to get us to the 50% that we need to get to.
Lauren, if you had the ear of the top financial institutions, I don't want to keep this all on finance, but Procter and Gamble, General Motors, and you were able to say, here are one or two things that you guys should do to make that path a little clearer. Take a machete and clear some of the brush away so women can see their way to the very top. What would those ideas be?
That's probably not a good question for me because I'm focused on the lower end of the middle market. So I'm looking at companies, say 50 to 250 million in revenue size, where there are not that many women, very few women in senior management. And I think that, while I agree with everything that Sallie has said at the large corporate level, I still think that even saying that to boards and looking at the benefits from having a diverse board, I think women should stop worrying about whether or not they sound like a bitch and be annoying. I mean, honestly, when I went to law school, there were like less than 10% of my class was women. I was shocked. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. I basically talked my way in, to law school. My scores were not wonderful. And I said what you said. I said, you will not be sorry if you admit me during my interview. And when I got out, in terms of getting a job, I showed up at the SEC coming from California. I was in New York, and there were like 30 inductees, new attorneys in this room. And I had like purple cowboy boots and a purple skirt and a red silk blouse, and every single person in that room was wearing a navy blue suit. I was like, oh my God, what happened here? Where was I when the memo was handed out? But I just kept showing up and pushing and saying, I want more, I want more, I want more. And there were other women sitting there saying nothing. So I don't know what you can do on a corporate board level. I'm glad I wasn't in such a big organization as that.
I don't know how many of you guys noticed this, but when I asked her what can companies do, and I find this fascinating, and I'm glad you did it, because the behavior showed that the women who make it, she just turned it on us and said, we need to stop worrying about being bitches. Instead of saying, the onus is on corporations, the onus is on companies to make sure the path is clear. Margery, I'm with Lauren a little bit here. I think that in certain cases, and Sallie's right, these guys, they just can't look beyond 10 feet, to see something that looks a little different than what they've been so used to. But much of it has to do with us
yeah.
plowing ahead, putting the blinders on, and just like having Teflon, bouncing the negativity off.
Well, I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, maybe by far, having been working for about 45 years. And in my first job, I had to lie about being pregnant to keep my job. So
did you feel you had to lie, or you had to lie?
No, I had to lie. There was a rule. You couldn't work after 6 months, and we needed the money. So, yeah, I lied. But that's a story by itself, because I ended up getting advanced. No, the other way. They didn't want to lose me. I think there is, I just wanted to comment for 2 seconds about the question about what can be done, and then come back to this question about what we can do for ourselves. So in terms of what can be done, there are other things that are being looked at that I think we need to keep out there. First of all, we have to stop having meetings like this where there are no men in the room. It's ridiculous. If you look at the ratio...
Jack Rifkin's here.
No, where there are some wonderful men in the room who believe. And we need to get some of the people who need to hear more about this and understand the incredible talent that's in the room, because otherwise we just keep talking to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it should be mandatory or something that they're at least to listen, if not to, and the men need to advance that. I understand it's an advancement to have the panel and a better timing, but I think we have to keep pushing for that. So I do think there are a lot of things like that we can do. The other thing is, we've been talking to search firms about making sure that it's not that they put a woman in the mix, it's that there at least half of the mix is women. Because if you only have one woman in the mix and the rest are men, then the chances of having that woman be the one selected is really, not very good. But if you start having more, if we can have certain things that that maybe should be automatic but aren't, At least it helps pave the way. Now, what can we do for ourselves? So I created this business. I was the only employee. And there were very few women because a lot of it is public affairs, and then it grew into global communications. And we have about 700 people now around the world. And what I learned along the way was, first of all, to be very self-reliant, and that sometimes you just have to show that brave face, even inside if you're quaking, like you said, Liz. I think that there is a wonderful opportunity, and this is a rule I've had, in the power of being underestimated. And the people who are the most, the people who will most underestimate you are the people who have the most bias, and so they deserve to get what they get. So I've taken advantage of lots of situations that have gotten my company advanced and me advanced just because nobody saw it coming, and because I was better organized and prepared to take advantage of an opportunity. So I think there's some opportunities in that. The next thing is that I think that to the extent there are fewer women in the room that there should be, there's a way to also be remembered and to be really smart, but also not look like everybody else. And I think that that has also served well, and to keep a sense of humor about it. But the last thing is, and I keep preaching this internally, we're the only firm of our size that's majority women-owned. And we are employee-owned firms, so that means we have men and women in ownership positions. So the men in our firm are, wonderful men who believe in equality and all those good things, and we're better for it. We just found out this morning we're named best place to work in our industry, so I'm very happy about this. But what I was going to say is that just recently I offered a woman. There was a great woman in our Brussels office, and she was going to leave the firm for another opportunity. And I met with her for about a half a day. I stopped in Germany. We met there at the airport, and so we created and we decided we wanted to keep her, and this is the man she reported to as well as the women in the firm, that we would keep her. And so we offered her this job, and she spent about an hour telling me why she didn't think she was qualified for it. And I finally just said, I'm going to shoot you. This is going to be an act of violence because you can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, want to have more opportunity, on the other hand, not be willing to take responsibility when it's offered to you and to step up and do it. Because all you do is perpetuate this feeling on the part of some of the men you're working with that you're just not up to the task, or you just don't want to take it on. And you're perfectly up to the task. And I will personally mentor you through this, but you better take this job or I will personally shoot you.
Richard, that's exactly, it's a perfect example of that
Yes.
Not leaning in, kind of pulling back a little bit. But let's also address the elephant in the room, and that is how women are perceived even before they're asked, whether you may, as a manager, have thought many times, oh, she'd be perfect. Oh, but you know what? She probably won't want to because she's got 2 little kids at home and a husband, and I know she looks a little beleaguered at times. I don't want to, it's not a nefarious way that they're being, but is there a sort of a preconceived notion in the past that you have noticed on behalf of male managers to say, don't give her that big project. I heard her kid is struggling or something, or they have some health problems in the family. Mm-hmm. Instead of, they never think about that with men. Nobody ever says to the man when he says, I'm going on a business trip to Zurich, they never say, but who's watching the kids? Yet when I go, my mother-in-law's, well, who's going to watch the kids? Your son, actually? But do you think that there's that preconceived notion that holds women back?
I think part of that, I'm going to turn this back. I think no one, to your point, has ever asked me how I managed to handle it all. And I have 2 kids, and I have 2 million frequent flyer miles, and no one has ever said that to me.
Never.
Never. But interestingly enough, and if I were to leave the office early to go to a ball game or a dance recital, I was getting great kudos. What a great dad. He's so involved. My assistant's child had a very terrible case of cystic fibrosis and had to be out of the office quite often. And the comments I heard, largely from other women, were, look at her, she's leaving again to take her kid to the doctor. She gets away with murder. And I think that does tend to, the real elephant in the room is that I don't see senior women acting in a mentor capacity for junior women and pulling them up. And maybe that's because there aren't enough of them. Maybe it's because once you ascend to that role, you don't want to be identified by your otherness, because you want your skill set to be the reason that you're there and not some other reason unrelated to you. So I don't see it necessarily that men are opting out from promoting women into those roles because of those issues. I think we have to watch the language that we use. Language is very powerful. Why is there a working mother magazine? It's the most ridiculous thing. There's not a working parent magazine.
I think they switched to working parent. They finally did.
For years.
Right.
But I think the implication is that there's something of an aberration to this phenomenon. If you need your own magazine to help you deal with the ability to work and have children, and men don't need their own magazine. There was never a working men magazine. And language is very, very powerful. Until we start upending that and creating the parenting as the issue that workplaces need to resolve as opposed to motherhood, we're never going to get beyond this.
Sallie, I know you have thoughts on this.
I have lots and lots of thoughts, and one of them is that I don't want to let the companies off the hook this easily and put it all back on the women, because again, you know, there are some things that's just going to be hard for us to change. And one of the things that's going to be hard for us to change is we have the babies. I mean, last I checked, there was one guy who had a baby once, right? And they ended up divorced, I think. You know, and there are certain, you know, in the middle of the night when the baby cries, you know, yes, you can give him a bottle, but, you know, there are just some things we're going to find it very hard to change. And women's inherent nature, it's going to be decades before we can convince all of our daughters to go for that stretch assignment and not to show her vulnerability around it. And it's going to be decades and decades before, you know, we get rid of some of the things that Rich has said. By the way, I have seen women who were not offered jobs because they had children at home, and they weren't offered those jobs by other women. So I've seen it all, right? I have seen it all. But let me give you another example of something we're not going to change. That we might as well put on the table and talk about is, and I started to hit on it, we're just tired, right? We get tired, and companies, the smart companies, will figure out how to deal with it. Let me give you one tiny example, which is hair and makeup. Now, we don't like to talk about hair and makeup because we sort of don't want to admit it and it seems frivolous, but let's go to the facts, which is that for most women, if we take 15 minutes a day on hair and makeup, which the guys don't have to take, and I take more by some measure, 15 minutes a day is an hour and 15 minutes a week, is 5 hours a month, is 60 hours a year, right? On that little tiny thing. Before we get to the child care and the housework and this subtle discrimination and the overt discrimination. The smart companies, put it back on the smart companies will start to recognize the facts, start to recognize the returns. Perhaps some of the people who are in here who are investors could also recognize those facts and recognize that companies that are rated as the best places to work, that have the highest diversity, tend to outperform the stock market, the research has showed, right? But they will start to recognize this and start to think creatively about ways to work with women, not to try to get women into the male box. So one thing I've talked about is flexibility without shame. Today we have 5.5 million women who are who are staying at home, looking after their kids, who would like to economically re-engage in some way, who find it after a couple or a few years at home almost impossible to get back into the workforce, and certainly not at the levels they were before. Would you believe that today 60, not 16, 60% of full-time working women with minor children wish they had flexibility? Now, most companies will tell you we have a flexible work program, but the women are saying, no, you don't, because they know they get sidelined. The companies that get to flexibility without shame, that allow women to work like banshees when they want to, and men, allow part-time for a bit, telecommuting for a bit, go home for a bit, come back, will be rewarded, because those individuals, male or female, will be so happy, right? And the smart companies will say it's better to have 60% of a fully engaged person's time than 100% of a harried, hassled, awful person's time, sad person's time, angry, you know, all that stuff. And the reward at the end, we live 6 to 8 years longer than men do. They are having heart attacks on the golf course, and we are starting businesses. Look at Arianna Huffington. Look at Nancy Pelosi. Look at Hillary and Bill, right? That ability for us to power the economy through better engaging everybody, to me, gets to it, right? Gets to the core, and it's going to be smart companies who will get this, and many on the West Coast are starting to. On the East Coast, not so much. But these startups, these guys are recognizing there's a talent pool out there that may need to be more flexible along the way, but that's going to keep on going.
Lauren, you know, I bring this up because I think people like to hear these experiences, but I still believe that when a woman gets pregnant and people see her walking around the workplace with the growing belly, et cetera. I mean, when I got pregnant with my first child and I called my mother of 5 kids, she was a formerly trained Royal Academy of the Dramatic Arts theater actress who gave it all up, and not happily so, to raise us. When I called her up and said, Mom, we're pregnant, her first comment was, what are you going to say to CNBC? I was working at CNBC at the time. Are they going to be mad at you? I was like, Mom, a simple congratulations would do. But she, knowing that I was very fulfilled by my career, immediately did what I knew the rest of the world was thinking. She put that fear in me, hide it, kick ass in the workplace, and you know, there was nowhere to rest or anything like that. I literally slept under my desk between my morning and afternoon shows. And I'd emerge at around 10:30 in the morning from underneath my desk, and you know, Mark Haynes is looking at me like, what the hell are you doing? But I did what I had to do. Was it pleasant? No, but that always rang true in my mind. And she didn't mean it negatively. She just wanted me to succeed and not get sidetracked. So, Lauren, you know, is there a way to talk to women in the workplace and say, it's okay, do this. It's a short period of time in the grand scheme of things, the geologic time map of the workplace. Do it, get through it, and we can take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we have 60 people that work for us. You know, more than half are women. I think you just simply, you create a policy. I mean, certainly if you have your own business, it's very easy to say we have maternity policy, we have flexible working hours. I mean, I pretty much experienced the same thing you did when I was pregnant at the SEC. The first thing everybody said to me is, so are you quitting? I'm like, quitting? I just got out of law school. What did I do this for? But I think I was talking about this. My husband, who's here, we're partners, and I found when I was an attorney and working in private practice, my son was a year old, and I went to them and said, I would like to work 3 days a week, and I will take a 40% pay cut. And I still billed the same number of hours, which is very important in law firms, you guys probably know. And after about 6 months, they gave me a very poor review and said, you know, the partners are really unhappy that you're not here full time. And I said, yeah, but I took a 40% pay cut. So I ended up leaving, deciding that I could not become a partner in a law firm because I wanted to have a family. I have 3 children. And when Arthur and I started our business, one of the great things is I have a very supportive, as you said, spouse. And when I traveled, he was home. When he traveled, I was home. We lived close to the office, so we always came home for dinner. We went back at night. We had nannies. I mean, you know, I think what he and I talked about actually on the way over here this morning is that women's, the fertile period for career, especially in finance, on Wall Street, we see, you know, 25 to 50, because people burn out. It's so intense. And those are women's childbearing years, and it's really a conflict. It's not going to be for everybody, but if it is for you, I think it's really critical to have a supportive other that can help you, because otherwise it's almost impossible. The demands on you in business are so extreme. Now, if you're in a larger company, you know, where you can have these flexible work schedules and so forth, that, you know, really helps. But in a business like ours, where I'm on an investment team and I need to interview the managers and I need to look at the documents, and it's going to be tough if you don't have somebody standing by to help you.
Can I add something to that? So I've been married 46 years. I have 3 children and 10 grandchildren now. And my whole career, I have traveled extensively. I'm, you know, probably gone 60% of the time, maybe
Well,
more.
let's explain. You've got offices in the Middle East, in Asia,
Right, all over the world.
Africa, everywhere, right?
Yeah. So, and they were all started from scratch, which required going in, learning the markets, finding the people, getting it set up, and even today, next year's 30 years of doing this. And I worked in a similarly intense job before, but even today, you're the cultural glue, so you're out there a lot. But I wanted to say two things about the work-life balance part of this, because I think the spouse or partner involvement is really important, and having the same goals. Not having the same personalities, not having the same drive, not judging each other, but deciding what works for you. But that's an individual thing. That's not something we can sit up here and preach. It's something you have to find for yourself. But I also wanted to speak to the guilt, because I'm now watching my children with their children, and two of my kids are in my business, and I'm seeing this through a whole different perspective. And I have to say, looking back on all of this, I spent a lot of time feeling guilty. And if there's one thing that I'd like to do at this meeting today is alleviate some of the guilt, because I involved my kids a lot in the home front and in the partnership. And they learned real skills doing that. They learned how to help at the house. They learned how to cook. They learned how to take care of each other. And they're still remarkably close. I mean, my oldest is now 45, 43, and 40, so age range. And so this has gone on for a long time. And it made them better parents when they got to be parents. It made them a lot less spoiled about the world. And I regret having felt guilty for so many years, because what they got out of this was something that I didn't even know I was giving them. And I included them. I took them on business trips one at a time when I could, and found little ways that they could feel a part of the life. So it wasn't, work over here, home over here. And anyway, so I just wanted to throw that out, because I think it's really important.
Well, it is, but, and getting back to sort of the issue at hand, Richard, how do we engage male corporate leaders to become agents of change, to be those people who look at this not as, oh, she's wresting power from me because we need more women here, but rather this is great. We've heard the numbers about ROI, return on investment, and how companies with women on their boards and companies that have women there, they really do actually perform better than their competitors. It's just a fact. There have been many studies done. But how do we get men in power positions to become agents of change for this situation?
Well, I think, excuse me, looking at the paper today, this is the Wall Street Journal, Deutsche Bank lags on its gender pledge. So in a year, when they have made a commitment to kind of add more senior women to management, they've been unable to add one. So I think the first thing we have to do is convince men that it's not a zero-sum game, that by adding women to the ranks of executive management does not diminish their ability, and in fact the corporation can grow for all the reasons that you mentioned. The ROE statistics, everything is there. But that's already been there, and people know that. So I think we try and come up with solutions-driven initiatives here at the Institute. So we really need to stop, as we said last year, coming together and admiring this problem and then walking away. Because women's group after women's group in thousands of corporations, tonight, tomorrow night, the next night, there's cocktail parties and networking opportunities, and nothing ever happens. So I think what you need to do is find a model. The reason that I put the first quote in here from Ruth Bader Ginsburg at on the first page of this pamphlet is because at a time of such promise, when it seemed like we were breaking through the gender gap, that it was no longer going to be one woman at a time and that was going to be sufficient, we've done essentially nothing and moved nowhere in those 20 years. So I want to contrast this to another movement. In the early 80s, when AIDS started to afflict relatively disparate populations of gay men, Haitians, hemophiliacs, people who were relatively on the outskirts socially, what happened? ACT UP happened. Because at that time, there were drugs that were in the pipeline, but it was taking 12, 15, 18 years to get those remedies to patients, and those people didn't have 12, 15, 18 years to wait. So there was an immediacy that entered that discussion that was catalytic towards changing the space. And yet there's no immediacy coming to the gender issue. The reason that we all keep coming together and patting it on the back and walking away is because there's nothing driving a timing.
How do we get that immediacy?
I'm sorry?
How do we get that immediacy?
I think you need to seize the power that you have. you're 50% of the workplace, you're more than 50% of the college graduates. If my largest client had phoned me at the bank, I would have to drop everything I was doing to answer the call and address the issue. Yet collectively, I don't see a coalescing of women around and seizing your power, almost as though it's distasteful. It goes back to everything that we've said. There's a hesitancy and a pulling back oftentimes that women exhibit, that they really need to kind of just force themselves to the fore and demand this equality because it's not working.
So let's open this up for discussion and debate, because no one has ever accused me of not leaning in, okay? That was never the issue or the challenge. There is the analogy you draw, there is a challenge with it, which is with AIDS, nobody wanted to die. As a group of women, we can have different goals. You know, the women that are here in the room, we can all agree we all want to be CEO. But there are any number of women who don't want to be CEO, right? Who are at that stage in their life when they want to just sort of hold on, or when they actually want to exit the workforce for a period of time and may want to come back later. So, you know, our challenge is that the answers aren't black or white. Fix this problem, get more drugs to people and don't let them die. There's I want to have, as a woman or male, my success determined by what's right for me and my family and myself, and that's going to change and be different, et cetera, which is why I also think, in addition to that, with those women who do want to march to the top, coming together and using their power, I think it also has to come from investors who will look at these results and say they mean something, and we see an investment opportunity here, and we're going to invest in it, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to squawk about it, and that can be publicly traded companies with more diversity, with the better returns. It can be companies started by women, which are significantly underfunded in comparison to companies started by men, right? There are different ways. It can be electing more women officials, right? There are plenty of ways that we can use that power. And then it goes to boards of directors, where for many boards today, there are just too many of them. The numbers are too big. There's not enough personal responsibility. But the boards that have more diversity and have a real sense of skin in the game and ownership of the problem begin to help drive it, and CEOs do. So I think it's a few different things. I agree with your solution, but I think it's more than that as well.
Board seats are held by women to the tune of 16%. That's an increase of 1% over the past 3 years. But, they legislate it, actually, in certain European countries. In Norway, you've got to have at least a certain number of women on your boards. And I mean, does anybody think that that's an answer here? I mean, in the U.S., regulation gets us squirrely,
I've been involved in a lot of these discussions around the world, actually, and there's kind of the legislative route, then there's the persuasive route by having something hanging out there that could be an issue if they don't do something, and then there's our voluntary route. And I think we have to find a hybrid that works for us. And one of the things we were thinking about, and maybe this is something the Milken Institute can do, is to try to find a group of CEOs who actually agree with all this, have seen it in operation, and that will band together and kind of serve as a bully pulpit with their peers. Because the U.S. is not going to, I think the regulation route here will just not happen. So why waste a lot of empty bullets? Why not find a positive way that fits with the culture of our society to kind of push things, advance things?
Let me give you one idea, which again, I don't think I'm being controversial if I say that it's in all of our interests that we reduce the volatility and risk in our financial system. And one way to do it without quotas, which can give a number of people hives pretty quickly, is that the regulators there are already judging the management teams of the institutions. They have what's called a CAMEL rating, in which they measure capital adequacy, asset quality, management. And that is one way through channels that already exist. If the regulators were to look at the research and say, you know what, having more diversity of all kinds leads to lower risk?
I agree with both Margery and Sallie. I mean, I don't think government regulation, I think we have enough regulation, but I think that certainly regulatory bodies can evaluate whether or not there's an appropriate, management team to have the appropriate risk. I think if you can get a group of CEOs who are very proactive about recruiting women to boards, I think that would be great. I really do, because I don't think we see that out there.
I think the onus is on women in many regards, that we have to really reach out, reach behind, give people a hand up, but more in the behavior area. How valuable it would have been for me starting off to hear from somebody like Sallie, it's sort of examples, to hear from anybody here to say, okay, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to get turned down for something that you think that you deserved. That's okay. It's not supposed to feel great all the time. Then what are you going to do to fight back and walk back in there? You know, nobody ever said to me, march back into the news director and say, here's why I should get the weekend anchor job and not just be the beat reporter during the week, you know, and outline it and stick up for yourself, advocate, be very focused, eye contact. A lot of kids don't know how to do that. They get in the workplace and they just sort of expect it to come to them and expect people to notice that they did a really good job. Okay, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't. And it doesn't happen for a lot of guys either. It just happens to more women. So, you know, if we start to look at it and say simply, your fingers should really be bloodied on the climb. That's how it's going to have to feel to you. That I think is very much a realistic point of view.
And I think men are much more comfortable with that. I mean, in our business, the men don't expect so much to have people praising them, but the women, you know, I really need to encourage those women to speak up at the staff meetings. They're quieter, they hold back more. And men are just more comfortable with fighting it out, and women need to really push themselves forward and know that it's okay. You're going to make mistakes. That's how you're going to learn.
Well, there's that scene in Zero Dark 30 where she's sitting there around the table with all the men, and they're saying, well, what are the chances that this is Osama bin Laden? And I give it 60%, I give it this. And they finally looked to her, and she said, 100%. Okay, you guys get freaked out by that, so I'll say 95%, but 100%. And, you know, the head of the, what was it, the CIA? The head of the CIA, you could just see him, my God, finally somebody who has confidence in their answer. She happened to have matched up with a guy who wasn't intimidated or annoyed by her strength. He was really grateful that somebody had the courage of their conviction, also known as balls, okay? So that, I think, is something a lot of male managers would love to see in women, simply them saying, you know, yep, I can do it, no problem. I think we all need to get a little more Teddy Roosevelt in us, and that is that Teddy Roosevelt, our great former president, once said, if somebody asks you to do something you don't know how to do, say, sure, I can, and then set about learning how to do it. And that, to me, is really crucial. Yeah, let's open it up to questions. All we ask is that you say your name and the group that you're with. Yes.
Hi. So my name is Michelle Kidley, and I'm with Creative Artists Agency here. So in the spirit of challenging and being open about all of that, I'd like to just take a second and talk about our responsibility and how we're communicating all of these issues, in agreement with so much that's been said. But Liz, I just want to talk to you about how you even framed the opening, which was when you introduced Lauren. You talked about her accolades, and then you said, and I hate you. Mm-hmm. When you talked about her accomplishments. And then
I really do hate her.
I understand. But we have to be careful about this moment. And so going back to why all of our language is really important. And then when you talked about Sallie, you talked about her as a mom. And when you talked to Richard, you didn't mention anything about being a parent. And so I say that just because from the very moment that we started this conversation again today, we're doing that thing over and over and over again, which we've liberated ourselves from meeting here at 6:30, which was last year, to 9:30.
Next
which
year's 11:30.
Very appreciative, and that to be in a bigger room, because hopefully we'll open it up so that this is a conversation that is far more shared than insular. But I think that in that same spirit of we've analyzed the problem for too long, that we need to be unapologetically female, and we need to be really empowered to call each other in the moment and have this moment where we're being supportive and additive and on top of it, but we also say, you know what, if I'm saying the wrong thing in the moment, or something that can be advanced, or something that the agenda that can move forward, I would hope that every person here would feel super comfortable to say that to me, because that's the only way that we go from being in the Oakhurst room, I think that's the name of this room, to being a much larger room and in that conversation constantly. And again, and Liz, I'm sorry that I'm calling you out on this, but as the member of popular culture who is the conversationalist to many, many conversations, I think all of us need to realize where our power base comes from, whether it's in a boardroom or it's in a classroom or it's in front of the media at large, and realize that the power of our voice has to be constantly in check with what's happening. And so that's the moment that I hope that we can take here to realize that moment when we're making that little giggle of I hate you because you're so accomplished. It is an insecurity, and it is a constant issue that we're dealing with, and we need to veer away from being nervous to talk about. I mean, Sallie, I appreciate the fact that you talk about hair and makeup. I wish I'd done mine this morning instead of in the car on the way over, which is usually the case. But that's real about our gender differences, so let's be unapologetic about it, and let's embrace that as a strength.
So let me, I think those comments are fabulous. And let me add a couple of things, and it's part of the reason that I've started to talk about, and we haven't talked about it today, but that, you know, everybody who introduced me is too polite to say, I got fired twice, right? Now I'm supposed to say restructured out and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, the honest discussion and conversation about our journeys, and we're talking about the journeys here today, I think is valuable to everyone. The point you made that I thought was, one of the points you made that I thought was so good is this feedback to each other. So, by the way, research shows that men are uncomfortable giving women feedback. And part of the reason our climb is tougher is because we don't get the feedback the guys get. The reason that they're nervous about giving us feedback is because they're scared we're going to become emotional. It just is what it is. And so, therefore, I've found that asking for feedback all the time in every way, in a very unemotional type of way. You know, how did I do? How did that presentation go? How could I do better? You know, when I left one of my companies the next day, I called the board members and asked them how I could have done a better job. I assure you, it hurt, right? But giving them that permission so that hopefully for the next woman, you know, they will be more comfortable doing it, I think is important. And of course, the media plays such a big role here. We've all of us who are in positions of visibility as females recognize we can get attention, and that sometimes, you know, that attention veers more towards what we're wearing, or how we conduct ourselves, or what kind of accent we have than we might otherwise prefer.
You know, I mean, I think that it's also really important to speak to something that Sallie said earlier. We could try and get, you know, more testosterone and less estrogen. You know, but we shouldn't lose our sense of humor, certainly. I mean, we shouldn't lose that sort of girl club feeling. Sallie's going to kill me for this. When we were in the green room, we were talking. She's like, okay, your eyelashes, are those strip or are they individuals? You know. That's okay. I don't care. I'm a 2-time Emmy Award winner. You should
have heard what I asked Rich.
Yes.
Okay, so as a husband of one of these women, I really think that you guys are really focused on the wrong thing. And I'll just be very direct with. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I think you guys are being very focusing on the wrong thing. You already have the power. Stop talking about it and do it. Here's the difference between me and you. There's a brass ring in the middle. Looks interesting to me. I'm going to go pick it up. You guys are going to have a debate about it. Is the ring nice? Is it not nice? The other thing is, there's prejudice in the world. I'm Jewish. A lot of people don't like Jews. Why? I have no idea. I don't care. It's not going to stop me from achieving what I want. It's not going to stop Lauren from achieving what she wants. Stop talking about it. You already have the power. You live longer than we do. You bear children that we can't do it. You're the emotional center of the family. You're obviously superior. Well, whatever. You're obviously superior to us, okay? Just do it. Stop talking.
Jack.
Yeah, just a couple of comments here. It's not a case of just doing it. I think you need You need to absolutely continue talking about this, and you need to create more forums to do it, whether it's leanin.org or whatever. But the fact is, and it gets back to what Sallie said, it's all in the data. The data shows that corporations that are more diverse, it's diversity arbitrage here. If you're running an organization that actually understands this, you can attract the best people, whether they're women, men, or whatever. I mean, I had an organization where we had a lot of very successful women, but we also had a lot of very successful men, but they were different men from who might have been there. You know, the guy who stands up and says, yeah, I can do this and all that, he's going to create a suboptimal organization because he's not going to deal with the diversity that's available to create powerful organizations. It's not going to work for most of the women here. I mean, you need to be the voices for this. It's for the next generation. And that generation is the one that needs to find those companies that are already taking advantage of diversity arbitrage. They're hiring the best people. There's no question about that. And they need to go to those organizations as opposed to fighting their way up in what's going to be a suboptimal organization to begin with. It's not a case of, you know, we need to be different. We need to be like men. Because the men running most of these organizations are running suboptimal organizations. You need to fire them and get somebody else who's doing it. And the women just need to make their selections to be part of those organizations that have already recognized that. And the men that go there are different men. You end up with a very different organization.
I just wanted to comment on continuing on that diversity theme. So I actually led the Diversity Council for a number of years at the bank. And when I got there, the language that was used was about tolerance. Like we were going to teach tolerance. And people don't want to be tolerated. I mean, tolerance confers a superiority and an inferiority. And it just is so puzzling in organizations that are more than half women that such a significant percentage of the employee population would need some advocacy around tolerance. So it goes back to this idea of language. We're 40 years into the women's movement, and not much has happened, really. So I think we need to start upending the way we speak about it, upending the actions we take about it, and I really would encourage you to demand more and get things done.
And I agree. I just want to be clear that I don't think anyone here is advocating that women act like men. I think the person that says, I can do this, is looking for other people. And my experience with those people is, for the most part, they don't care who they're working with as long as they're competent. They don't care color, they don't care gender. They're looking for people who can also say, I can do this.
Yes.
One of the points I want to make is that we've talked about all the metrics that prove that diversity actually enhances return. But fundamentally, there's a challenge there, and that is it's much harder to lead diverse teams than it is to lead homogeneous teams. And so people take the easier path out. You choose a bunch of people who are just like you because it's just easy to manage them and lead them.
Bingo.
They will agree with you, they go along, and I think that fundamentally changing that paradigm may be one of the solutions that we need to focus on. The metrics can be great, but if it's so difficult still, and it's hard to lead and manage that descent, people will revert back to what comes easy.
But the world is working in our favor in that sense, that the companies that will succeed in the future are the ones that can work in a trans-border way, in a very seamless way, and those kind of skill sets are going to be more and more valuable, and I think that gives us a real advantage.
I want to get in a couple more questions as we finish. Yes.
So first of all, I don't even know if this is on. I want to thank everyone. This has been one of the most exciting Milken events I've done, and having been here before. So thank you. This is great. But I want to get back to solutions and government. And so I'm Chief of Staff and Counsel for the New York City Comptroller's Office. And we've spent a lot of time looking at corporate governance and how do you influence? And one of the things we've been, I think, pretty good at is pushing transparency. How many women are at senior management? Because that is the filter to the board seat. How many women? And we've done, settlements with Goldman Sachs, MetLife. I mean, these huge institutions. But it came from a way of, if you put transparency on it and you start talking about what does it actually look like, that puts pressure. So whether it's not regulation, I just encourage everyone to think about transparency and ways government can do things, because it has been a huge shift, at least in New York. Some of the kind of large banks that we've been able to get these settlements from, and actually did not come from myself, but our head of our corporate governance thought about, well, how do you really get women there, and how do you talk about it, and how do you think about it? And the more things that I think that we can do like that, where we start thinking about, if we create transparency and think about it in this way, I think it is helpful. But it's certainly not across the board, but it's something that...
A little push there. One last question? Yes.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi.
My name is Manju Ganariwala. I'm the treasurer for Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you again, and I heard many thoughts on the panel. I think Sallie talked about the data exists there, but companies, CEOs and boards are not doing anything about it. So there's a lot of research that suggests diverse teams, genderly diverse teams produce better results. We talked about, Richard talked about there being an immediacy. And I've been sitting here thinking, I said, you know, we're consumers. We own stocks in companies. You know, we need to show our power, because we don't want incremental change in the 21st century. 100 years later, we show a 5% gain for women going from 16% to 25%. How about showing our power and making those boards and company management, you know, feel the bottom line, as consumers, not support those companies that have had terrible record of, promoting women or not being flexible with women. When you own stocks, show up to those investor, shareholder meetings, vote your proxies. Oftentimes, we just kind of do whatever is recommended.
Right.
So that may be a way to kind of move this into a higher gear.
Indeed, it's called the dollar vote. And as we finish, I wanted to thank all of you for coming here. This has just been a really, really important panel, and we'll get it moved up. I want to close with one or two quotes. Number one is, we've gone from Julius Caesar and Mark Antony saying, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars but in ourselves. Maybe it's a little fault of ourselves. But also, Babe Ruth once said, it's very hard to beat someone who never gives up. And I hope none of you ever give up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.